Hi everyone. The purpose of this video is to help you understand the value of visual literacy and also to guide you in the creation of a visual representation of the theory or theories that will frame your study. So you're going to be creating a visual display of knowledge. I wanted to start tonight with this quote by Eisner. The limits of our language do not define the limits of our cognition. And I thought this was a really important quote to start off with because we're creating this so that visuals might serve as another language for you to express a complex knowledge. In other words, you're going to be reading and you've read some very dense texts about theory. And we're asking you to create a visual in response to that theory as a way for you to express your understanding. Also, I want you to be thinking about how you might take this idea back to your own classrooms, because we know often our ELs, our English learners, understand much more than they can communicate that they understand. So thinking about visual as another language to display knowledge, to show what you understand. So let's look at some images. I wanted to start first with this one because it talks about how we used visuals long before we used speaking and writing. It comes from human evolution. In fact, some theorists suggest that because cognition started with visuals, that it might be the most effective way for us to understand something. Well, if you've ever tried to put together an IKEA piece of furniture or really any other complex item that needs instructions, you understand that sometimes images can capture more information or capture information more efficiently than words do. I know for myself, when I look at instructions, I really need the diagrams to help me. We're going to be looking at visuals that represent a lot of different kinds of images. They could be photographs like this one, the diagrams that you might find in the instructions here. They might be drawings, they could be graphic organizers. We're even going to be looking at some fabric-based images tonight together. So here's another example of where the instructions are really important. If you ever tried to do any origami with your class, you know that just saying something like fold your paper in half is going to be insufficient. So using the images is a way to help us understand more precisely, and it's a more effective way of transmitting the information. Sometimes diagrams can be more accessible than words. In a case like this, where it's a family tree, it can capture a lot of information in just a small space. It would take a lot, basically like a whole text, to be able to write out all of the relationships among the gods here that are represented. Another family that's complex might be the Brown family tree. This is a TV show I haven't seen, but trying to figure out the relationships among his multiple wives and all of the children that live in the home together. So again, sometimes diagrams can collapse a lot of information into a small space, making it more efficient. Visuals can also be used to categorize information. So in this case, the visual uses both images and text in order to organize information about transportation. This was an online example I found from a second grade class from a curriculum on transportation. Other times, so now we've looked at images that help collapse information, we've looked at images that help categorize information, but sometimes images are there for political and social information. We're going to look at the Chilean arapillas, burlap. They're brightly colored patchwork pictures that were stitched into sacks. They chronicle the life of the poor and the oppressed in Chile in the 70s and 80s during the totalitarian military regime of General Augusto Pinochet Ugarte. So poor women and women whose husbands, sons, or brothers were killed or imprisoned by the government shared their burdens and stitched small but very meaningful tapestries. It started off with just 14 women. And their handiwork told the outside world, all the people outside Chile, about their hunger, their fear, unemployment, housing shortages, and missing the menfolk who were still referred to in Chile as the disappeared or the detained. The arapillos, served to document and denounce oppression in a country where all normal channels of free expression were closed. So in other words, they were prevented from protesting, and they were able to share their experiences by creating these visuals through the tapestry sewn on the burlap. So here's some examples. And you can see all four are really different, but they tell their unique story, the unique story of the maker. And you can see the details, I mean, especially this one. But all of them seem to have family and life struggles woven into the details. So we've seen images as political, social information, images that help categorize information or sometimes collapse a broad range of information into one succinct section or image. And so what we're talking about here is visual literacy. And visual literacy is the complex act of extracting meaning from still or moving images. Visually literate learners can make connections, they can determine the importance of the image, they can synthesize information. Visuals do that very well for us. They can evaluate the visual information and also critique it. It's important because just because our students' worlds are so overwhelmingly visual in character doesn't mean that our students know how to critique, interpret, evaluate, and look at images critically. So it's more than just our kids being surrounded by images. We must teach them how to look at them and make determinations based on the images and their background knowledge together. So far we've been talking mostly about the receptive way that visual literacy, receptive meaning, just like we do in all literacies, it's like reading. We're looking at a text and interpret it. But I want to point out that visual literacy takes both receptive, like reading or listening, and productive, like speaking and writing. So we're going to be creating visuals, productive forms of visual literacy. So if you can read a map, draw a diagram, interpret symbols, then you are visually literate. Once again, visual literacy is reading and writing a visual text, so it includes both receptive and productive modalities. A visual text makes its meaning with images or with meaningful patterns and sequences. In other words, a graphic organizer is also a visual text. Although visual texts make meanings with images, they don't have to be without words. In fact, words and images are often combined to make the meaning. And in your project, you have the opportunity to combine images with words as well. So, a few key concepts about visual literacy. Visualizing is thinking. So we think of this in terms of our regular, traditional classroom literacy practices. We ask students to make images in their head as a way to help them understand. Visual literacy emanates from a nonverbal core, becomes the basic literacy in the thought process of comprehending and composing. This looks back to the first image that I showed you about how historically, how over time evolution, we looked at images before words and before speech and text. Also, experience with visual media is not just a route for better visual comprehension, but also may lead to a general enhancement of cognitive abilities. And you are reading a section by Masaris, not the 1994 that I'm referencing here, but another Masaris article in this module. Another important aspect of visual literacy actually comes out of semiotics, and it's called transmediation. And transmediation is the important process of moving from one science system to another. And we do this in classrooms all the time. We might have students draw as a response to written text, or we might have them act out something, or even moving from written text to oral text is a way to recompose or transmediate a message. So we're going to be thinking about transmediation, and basically your task for this module is to transmediate the dense, complex theoretical text into an image. And then finally, I wanted to point out that visual texts are graphic organizers of information. So once again, they may not be literal depictions in any way. They might just be broad organizers of information. This is so important for us working with English learners. So again, I have the double purpose of helping you navigate the complex text, but also with hope that you'll bring this back to your classroom. We know that visual texts are graphic organizers, and therefore they can be more accessible than words, especially for our English learners. In addition, graphic organizers are an effective teaching tool that can support understanding of difficult concepts and text. Further, non-linguistic representations have a positive effect on student achievement and provide diversity in the way that students process new information. So those are all reasons to encourage you to work with visuals in your classroom, specifically for English learners, but for everyone. In addition, the Common Core state standards make it very clear on page 4 that students are required to analyze and create a high volume and extensive range of print and non-print texts in media forms old and new. They need to conduct research to produce and consume media. So if your principals or anyone is questioning the use of visuals within your classroom practice, you can refer to the Common Core State Standards on page 4 to see that it is a requirement to be career and college ready. So right now I'd like to engage you in an activity. So after this slide, I'm going to ask you to pause the presentation and draw a picture of a librarian. And I'd like you to do a little labeling of your librarian. So you can caption it or annotate around the image and write a very brief paragraph explaining your description. After you've drawn your librarian, think about what your picture tells you about what it means to be a librarian and why you drew your librarian in the way that you did. So go ahead right now and pause the video and come back when you're done drawing your librarian. So, take a look at your librarian. How is your image like this image or unlike this image? Is your librarian holding books? Is your librarian wearing a tidy sweater, or does it reflect another era? What about this picture? This one also has a librarian with books and is really from another era as well. I would say these are both from the late 50s, early 60s. These librarians also are wearing glasses. Was your librarian wearing glasses? This one's wearing pearls. So think about all of the things that are in your image and how they relate to the images here. Here's another librarian wearing glasses and with books, but this one is holding up her finger to tell the people in the librarian to be quiet, a shh mode. How about you? Did you include being quiet as part of your librarian's persona? I just love this one. This is actually an action figure librarian, which is a little bit contradictory. But she comes with some books. She's dressed in her sensible shoes, and she's got her glasses on. And yes, she's also making that shh gesture to quiet the patrons in the library. But there are other perspectives on librarians as well. Remember, all images have we bring our culture to the image of a librarian. Here's one. This librarian looks more fun to me. She has her tight bun and she's wearing her glasses and her button-down shirt, but she looks more animated. Maybe she's reading to a group of children. What about this librarian? This librarian is the typical librarian as told on her shirt, but they call her a friendless old hag, and they talk about her enforcing the rules for the innocent browser who was only a day late. And look at the family in the background. My goodness. Then there is another perspective of librarians that are keeping some secrets behind their tight buns and glasses. Here's a new perspective on a librarian. In fact, you can see that they're not even called librarian now. They've indicated the librarian as a search engine. But there's also some other information besides her glasses and her sweater and the collar. But if we look closely behind the books, we see another image here, support your library. One of the key tasks of being a librarian these days includes fundraising. How about this librarian? Anyone draw a librarian that's a man? This is our first male librarian. He still has glasses and a button-down shirt, but he's male, and so maybe some of you worked at schools with male librarians. I know I did for about 10 years. I was at a school in Chula Vista that had a male librarian. Here's another male librarian, and this one seems to have appropriated the Uncle Sam poster in some way. Have you returned your library books? Huh, punk? Have you? And then there are all of the memes about librarians. This one specifically says the public librarian. What society thinks I am, what parents think I am, what Playboy thinks I am, what teens think I am, what I think I am, and what the reality of being a librarian is. One more meme. Here's another perspective. What my parents think I do, what my friends think I do, what my boyfriend thinks I do, what my patrons think I do, what the taxpayers think I do, and then what I actually do. Remember, images are cultural symbols that affect meaning. How did your image express your ideas? How did the images that you looked at affect you as a viewer? I'd like you to pause the video again and take a look at this little video on YouTube. It's less than 4 minutes long. It'll give you a broader perspective of visual literacy across the disciplines. So go ahead and pause that now. Okay, welcome back. Now we're going to be talking about visual information and across the disciplines. Remember, what you see, understand, or interpret depends on your background knowledge and your schema. So let's think, what information do the visuals here convey? So this one, I don't know if you recognize it. There are many different ways that we can look at this. It might be a mask. I see some eyes here. Or maybe it's a cocoon of some sort. But if we zoom out from this image, we can see that it's actually a CAT scan of a brain. So this is a very domain-specific image, but we have a lot of clues in the image to help us understand. These are the eyes, the nose, and even the words on the page, medical systems, brain, give us more clues as to interpreting the image. But since I don't have a background in medicine, and I have only looked at brains through like cognition, this would have been hard for me without all of the clues. And this image for me is very familiar because I do have a background in photography. I got a BFA in the 80s, and so I actually have used a camera like this before. But without that, especially without this explanation image here, the smaller inset image, you might not even know what this is. Here's another one. I don't need any I don't have to look very closely at all because my background knowledge tells me right away by the shape that this is Sicily, and this is my culture's from. My mama's from Sicily. She's actually from up here, but her town is not labeled. It's called Castellammare, and I know just because of my background that this blue represents the Mediterranean. Again, organizing information, but depending on my background knowledge. Here's one I don't understand at all. I have no background knowledge in mechanics, and in fact, I have no idea what a tooth segment or plunger unit might represent. I know what a plunger is, so I'm thinking, I have some idea of what the action might be, but a solenoid, that word's completely unfamiliar to me. So using both the images along with the text would help me understand, at least the basic principles of what this is, an engine. Here's an image I chose because I think we all have background knowledge on this one. We all can use our schema to interpret the image here. So I'm going to use a set of Elliot Eisner, who I quoted at the beginning, his visual literacy inquiry components. And that will be on the following slide, but I'm going to use them now to talk through this image. The first thing he asks is, how does this image affect the viewer? And from my perspective, I want to know more about it. So it affects me in that think it's a classroom. I recognize the tables. I can see the students working together in a small group. It makes me want to be there, and it makes me want to know more about what they're doing. It's expressed through photography, but it's also, I'm noticing that the image is just slightly higher than at the child's level. I know that if I was seeing this from overhead or from down below, that might express something different. So this is being expressed pretty much at the child's level. How do the symbols that appear in the image affect meaning? So in this case, the symbols will include the tools that the students are using, the way that the tables are set up, all of the supplies that the students need, even the bottles of water. How are they there to help me understand? So I feel that this is a collaborative group work experience. They might be doing something with writing. I see that the students are using, at least 2 of them are using pink, so that might be their group's color. And then how do the materials used to affect the meaning? So this is a photograph. So usually when I see photographs, especially from classrooms, there's an element of truth in it. So this is, I think, probably a literal depiction of what was happening in a small group activity. And then how does the cultural content affect the production and understanding of the image? So in this case, the culture would be the classroom culture. And looking at that, I can see that there's, again, in a small group, but I'm wondering about this boy. I'm wondering why these guys are working together. It seems like all 3 of them are contributing, but this guy over here, he is just watching. He's an observer. Because this is just one frame, I don't know if he was talking, if he contributed, but I do know that these guys are actively engaged with this text, with this activity, and that he might be, I can see his gaze, but I don't know anything more than that. So these are some of the questions that we just referred. I'm going to ask you to think about these after you create your image. So visual literacy, just as a repeat, it includes the receptive modes, that's decoding, understanding, seeing, and interpreting. If you get confused, think about language arts. This is the reading and the listening component. Encoding, conveying, intentionally communicating. This is a productive literacy, and thinking about writing and speaking as productive modes. So now we're going to focus more on the productive mode, because you're going to be required to create an image that's based on your theory. So I know you might be thinking, why? Why? What's the purpose of this? And there are some essential purposes. So you're going to be required to create a visual explanation of the theory or theories that guide your study in order to help you. So you might just visually represent one theory, like multiculturalism, or you might identify the essential aspects of the different theories and bring them together. So you might pick one piece from constructivism and one piece with multiculturalism and put them together in your visual representation that will describe the theory that will frame your study. So you're going to do 3 things. 1, identify the essential aspects of the theory that frame your thinking. Connect those aspects with your specific research context and your topic. So how does this relate to your study? Your kids, your classroom, your grade level, your school, and whether you're exploring discussions or a specific literacy strategy or differentiation. And then third, and this is what I'd like you to bring back to your own classrooms, a way to be free from the complexity of language needed to articulate these theoretical understandings. You've done some deep reading in this module. The images will help you articulate those understandings without the burden of the complex language needed. So I'm going to ask you to consider these following elements when you're creating your visual. First is the organization of elements. So if you put things close together, that means something. If you put things further apart, if they're outside the frame, inside the frame, above, below, think about how you organize all of the elements that you're going to include in your theoretical representation. How those elements are juxtaposed. This is from the Masaris reading. I want you to think about the use of the isomorphic and the non-isomorphic elements. So the isomorphic are the things that are instantly recognizable. They don't have to be theoretically based, like a stop sign, for example. And those non-isomorphic, the ones that are really seeped in the theory, that would be, you'd need to know the theory to understand those images represented. I want you to think about the medium. You're free to use any medium that you choose in your visual. You can include drawings, photographs, graphs, even we looked at fabric today, or any combination of those. It's fine. You're free to create a visual out of any medium that you want. And then finally, will you include text in your visual display? And you'll read in the article, in the Masaris article, about the inclusion of text within the visual. So remember, after you've done, consider that the images are cultural symbols that affect meaning. How does your image share information more effectively than it would just if you were writing it out? Does your visual do something different than a written explanation alone would do? How did your image express your ideas? And how did these images or your image affect you as a viewer? So, for the discussion board, for this module, you're required to choose the most appropriate theory or theories to frame your study and create a visual representation of the key elements as they apply to your specific action research project. The visual will illustrate the relationship between theory and praxis or praxis. So that talks about the theoretical framework and your context and study. You'll need to unpack your visual for the reader, including an explicit articulation of how this theory connects to your specific context. So you're going to have an image and then an explanation. Upload your visual representation of your theoretical framework along with that brief explanation of the visual to the discussion board by the assigned date.